This is episode 115 of the Magic Detective Podcast. This episode is called The Unmasking of Bess Houdini. That and more on this episode of the Magic Detective Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Magic Detective Podcast, your podcast home for magic history. I'm your host, Dean Carnegie. I am the Magic Detective, and this is episode 115. Well, I am back for my podcast. However, did you get a chance to listen to my other podcast? Well, not mine, but an episode dedicated to me. I was interviewed by master interviewer Scott Wells for his fantastic podcast, the Magic Word Podcast. And I had a great time talking to Scott, and I will tell you this, I made a big error during the episode, and I'm still kicking myself for this weeks later. I actually gave him an incorrect web address. That's like marketing 101. I can't believe I did that, but sure enough, I did. And well, in my defense, it was a new site, but still, I shouldn't have screwed that up. So, it's the address to my artwork and my prints, and you'll find my Houdini prints there, where I offer one unique print per month this year in honor of the 100th anniversary of Houdini's death. One of the prints, actually, one of this series is already sold out, and I haven't yet put the April prints up, but I should get those up here shortly. These are all limited edition prints. Most have very small runs. One of them had a larger run due to the small size of the print itself. But the bigger they go, the smaller the run. And they are high-quality art prints, and based upon the resale value of my artwork that's already out there, they should only increase in value over time. So, once I croak, you can start selling. Oh, and the correct web address for my artwork and prints is carnegie-magic.myshopify.com. Again, that is carnegie-magic.myshopify.com. And there is a chance I might be moving the site in the future, but for now, this is where you can purchase my prints. And if you didn't write that down, just look in the show notes. I'll put a link to the art page in my show notes. So, by the way, something is going to be debuting here very soon. I mentioned it, I think, on Scott's podcast, but I'm going to be doing a series of short mini videos on the life of Houdini, and I plan to do 52 of them in honor of the years of his life. I will be covering a wide range of topics, and maybe why, you ask? Well, a couple reasons. For one, this, as I've mentioned, is the 100th anniversary of his death, and it's, another way to celebrate his life. But the main reason is I'm really sick and tired of the AI crap that I keep seeing on Houdini on the internet, showing images that are not him and getting half the information wrong. I'm just sick of AI right now, and you have no idea. Ugh. Anyway, so I will be producing these and putting them up on various social media sites. The videos will be short, as I mentioned, covering very specific topics each time. And I would have had them out already, but my performing schedule has had me on the road a lot this year so far. So watch for that very soon. By the way, there is a plethora of new books coming out on Houdini this year. My friend Charles Green has a book called Exposing Houdini, which is a 10 by 10 coffee table book in a very limited run. It has some never before seen photos of the great magician. Dr. Bruce Averbrook and David Haversat have a book called A Strenuous Career, the Personal Challenge and Advertisement Scrapbook of Houdini. There is the Dr. Bruce Averbrook and John Cox book called Escaping Obscurity, the Travel Diary of Harry Houdini from 1897 to 1899. Next is Houdini, the Man Who Died Twice by Lorraine Gillespie. And then there is Handcuff King, The Conquests of Harry Houdini, 1900 to 1909 by John Cox. Kent Cummins has put out a book called I Want to Be Like Houdini. And there are a few more books that are out there in the works on Houdini. It's going to be quite the year for Houdini books, without question. Now, today's feature is Bess Houdini. And before I get into things, I want to share a story with you. And it comes from the pages of a pitch book that I wrote a few years ago, called A Magician Among the Ghosts. And this was for a Victorian seance magic show that I was doing at the time. The title, of course, borrows from Houdini's own works. The contents, however, much different, as they all come from my own first-hand experiences. You see, I grew up in what we were told was a haunted house. The original building dated back to the 1850s, and there had been two additions put on the house, one in the 1930s and one in the 1950s, I believe. And suffice to say, the sturdiest part of the house was the oldest. And on our property of 30 acres was also a Civil War encampment. No one knew exactly where this encampment was, but the locals all knew it was supposed to be somewhere on our land. And we searched numerous times with metal detectors, and as it always came up empty. And then, just by chance, after a kind of a bad rainstorm, the encampment revealed itself. And basically what happened, lead bullets were found scattered on the ground. I found a trigger from a pistol, a tent stake, and even a Union Army belt buckle. All of these things were found on the ground. But back to the house. The guy we purchased the house from told us that the property had been known to be haunted. Apparently, some guy was killed himself on the front porch many, many, many years before. And neighbors would report seeing ghostly figures walking in the property. So that's the environment I grew up in on this house. I will tell you, I never saw a ghost. But years later, when I was living in Fairfax, Virginia, I had just come home from work, and the latest issue of Magic Magazine was in the mail. I picked it up from the mailbox, and as I went to step into my bedroom, I tossed the magazine on the bed and then turned to hit the bathroom. I decided to take a shower. And once I finished all that, I walked out of the bathroom towards my bedroom, and that's when I saw the magazine standing upright on my bed. And it really caught me by surprise. I looked at it in amazement for a moment, and then I began to step into the bedroom, and when I clicked the light switch, it didn't come on. The light was apparently was burnt out. So I walked over to the bed to turn the side lamp on, and as I was about to turn that side lamp on, I saw a shadow of a figure in the hall, and it was an oddly familiar figure. And just then, as I turned the light on, the room flooded with light. That very second, the magazine fell over on its side, and the shadow outside in the hallway was gone. Now, I turned the lamp off immediately, and there was no figure in the hallway. I walked out to see if someone was in the house or one of my roommates, more than likely, but no one was home, just me. Anyway, the strange magazine that stood on edge was the October issue of Magic with Bess Houdini on the cover. And for the record, I'm not saying that any of these stories in the book are actual ghosts or paranormal activity. I tell the stories as they actually happened. Any of them could have a logical explanation, but I will tell you this part. They sure were creepy. And ever since that time, I've always had this sort of a soft spot for Bess Houdini because she was on the cover of that magazine the day that weird thing happened. So you may be wondering, why do a podcast on Bess? Because I had this weird thing happen? Well, no. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, hasn't she already been covered in the past while talking about Houdini. And honestly, the answer to that is no. She's always glossed over. There's a brief mention of her here and there in the Houdini history, but mostly she's overshadowed by her husband. And I began thinking of her as someone who was on the inside, but many ways was also on the outside. And I will further explain this as I delve into the life of this very interesting woman. Wilhelmina Beatrice Rauner was born January 23, 1876, in Brooklyn, New York. She came from a family of 9 sisters and 1 brother, and yet we know precious little about her family. Her father was Gebhard Rauner, and her mother's name was Balbina. We know her older brother's name was John Rayner, and she had a younger sister named Sophia, a sister named Maria, a sister named Stella, who may have also been Pauline, and the rest is pretty much a mystery. In the Harold Kellogg biography of Houdini, there is a much romanticized version of how she met Harry. Some story about him doing a show at her school and spilling acid on her dress, which left a stain. Last time I checked, acid would do more than leave a stain. It would burn a big hole in the fabric. Anyway, he apologizes profusely and asks to have the dress so his mother can repair it, and thus their first meeting. The most popular account, however, Bess had been bitten by the showbiz bug and had joined a song and dance act called the Floral Sisters. She was just 18 at the time. She was using the name Bessie Raymond. Some accounts claim that Bess was actually Theo's girlfriend, or at least his date. Theo was Houdini's younger brother, also known as Dash. Upon being introduced to Houdini by Theo, the two locked eyes, Harry and Bess, and Harry basically stole Bess away from him. 2 weeks later, they were married. Marie Blood, Bess's niece, tells a very different story. From the pages of the New Tops magazine, September 1985, she says the following, quote, "There was no such thing as the Floral Sisters. Bess joined a traveling carnival, and she did not start out as an entertainer. She did some sewing, washed dishes, and whatever else she could do to make herself useful. They didn't have her singing right away," unquote. So according to Marie Blood, Bess ran away with the circus, and that's where she met Harry. In the same article, she mentions how Bess had been done wrong by the various movies, as they often show Bess as having a fierce temper. According to Marie, this is just not true. She was a very sweet-tempered person, and she never knew any of the Rayners to be high-strung in any way. Once again, I think she was mistaken, at least in regards to Bess. There is a story related of Houdini and Bess getting into arguments, and Harry would walk around the block. As he returned, he would throw his hat through the front door. If the hat came flying back, he would walk around the block again. When he was able to throw the hat into the house without it coming back, he knew Bess had calmed down. I don't think Marie was lying. I just think that Houdinis were on their best behavior when guests were present, which was sort of standard practice back in those days. I'm not sure people behave that way anymore. Rather, they let it all hang out, so to speak. From the Kalush biography on Houdini, we learn that Bess could be very moody. She would have bouts of nervousness. She was physically frail her entire life. Curiously, Bess refers to herself as the most married woman in America, having been married at Coney Island, and then by a Catholic priest, and then a rabbi. And there's only one problem with that. An April 1991 story in Genie magazine poses the question of whether or not she and Harry were ever married. According to Bess, John McCain of Coney Island conducted the first initial marriage. However, in 1894, when she claims to have been married, John McCain was an inmate in Sing Sing Correctional Facility. He had been arrested and convicted on election fraud and padding the registry rolls. He wasn't released until April 30th, 1898. There is also no record of the Catholic priest whose name was given as Reverend G.S. Louis, and the rabbi who claimed to have married them would have been 14 years old, so he couldn't have married them. Then the biggest stickler of them all, Catholics forbade marrying outside the faith at the time, as did the Jewish religion. So it really throws into question whether they were officially married. Certainly, she could have been his common-law wife. Houdini seems to be pretty much a straight arrow, so I'm sure they were married at some point, even though no marriage certificate survives to this day. Unlike some of the movies, Bess was welcomed into the Weiss family. She and Cecilia got along well, at least at first. There may have been some moments in the course of their lives when things weren't so smooth. Houdini was the epitome of a mama's boy, and that may not have always sat so well with Bess. The reverse wasn't so good. Bess and Bess's mother were not on speaking terms. It would be some time before the rift was repaired. Whether Bess was a show person as part of the Floral Sisters or not, she wasn't involved in it very long before she married Houdini. Bess writes, quote, "Within a few days after my marriage, I began to realize that I had stepped into a world far different from my former well-ordered and sheltered life. A world of strange duties, strange contacts, and inexplicable happenings which my superstitious nature magnified into terrors." Then we come upon this anecdote from Bess, quote, "Houdini asked his brother and me to take a walk with him after the evening's work was over. He led us into the country on a dark, lonely bridge spanning some swiftly running black water. It was a weird-looking night, with a split moon that seemed to be dodging in and out behind very heavy clouds. In the middle of the bridge, he halted us, and there we waited, silently, I at least in growing trepidation. Finally, a distant bell tolled solemnly 12 times. As soon as the last beat ceased to reverberate, Houdini clasped his brother's hand and mine together, raised them aloft, and cried, 'Beatrice, Dash, raise your hands to heaven and swear you will both be true to me. Never betray me in any way, so help you God.' His brother and I repeated the vow after him, and then Houdini kissed me and shook Theo's hand. 'I know you will keep that sacred oath,' he said." Their life together was interesting. They spent most days together. She was part of the act, after all, at least early on, and even later she was often at the theater with him. One thing we do learn through various biographies is that Houdini wrote many love letters to Bess. Ruth Brandon, author of The Life and Many Deaths of Houdini, concludes that he was overcompensating for something. Perhaps he was impotent. Perhaps he just simply did not know how to deal with women. I believe the truth is much simpler. Houdini was at heart a romantic. In 1992, many years after both Harry and Bess had passed away, Gary Chapman would write a book called The 5 Love Languages. It was and is a popular self-help book that identifies 5 ways people express and receive love. These include words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. Clearly, Houdini was a words of affirmation guy, and throughout his entire life would send notes of love and adoration to Bess, even when they lived in the same house. He would often have the maid take notes down to Bess, who might be in another part of the house. Or he would leave notes for her to find. On the contrary, that doesn't seem to be how Bess expressed her love, as the love letters back to Houdini are rather devoid. Her method of expressing her affection may have been through quality time. There can be no doubt they were affectionate towards each other. In the book Houdini, His Legend and His Magic by Doug Henning and Charles Reynolds, there is a section in that book called A Houdini Scrapbook. It contains mostly photos of Bess and Harry, and they are often shown holding hands, hugging, even dancing with each other. These photos show them when they were young and nearly up until the time of Houdini's death. They never stopped their public displays of affection in photos, and frankly, couples that fall out of love, well, you can often tell in photos, as one partner will stand slightly away from the other, or something about them just seems off. But in the case of Harry and Bess, they always have this bond of love between them. Sadly, the Houdinis never had children. There have been many theories about this. One stated that Houdini was sterile thanks to the effects of too many x-rays from his brother Leopold's machine. Marie Blood, Bess's niece, says that Aunt Bess never had a period in her life. She never menstruated, hence she couldn't have children. In the recent book by Brad Ricca, Lincoln's Ghost, Houdini's War on Spiritualism, he devotes a chapter to Bess's health issues and that she might have had something called Turner syndrome. But without being able to examine her body and without blood tests and such, it's impossible to know if that was the case. All we know is they did not have children. There is a story I came across of a party that the Houdinis attended, and it may have been at their home, I don't remember. But there was a colonel there who flirtingly told Bess to come sit on his knee as they shared a glass of champagne. And Bess does it just to get a rise out of Houdini. But when he steps into the room, the look upon his face is one that she would never forget. It was much more severe than that gut punch he would later take from Gordon Whitehead. This image nearly brought Houdini to his knees. It was days before he was consolable. Now back to their earlier days. In 1895, Houdini and Bess became part of the Welsh Brothers Circus. They had many duties in this circus besides doing their show. Bess became a singing, dancing clown. She learned how to present a second sight act with Harry. And of course, they did the trunk trick with them as well. In 1896, Harry and Bess were working for Professor Dooley in the Marco Magic Company in Canada. Bessie would have another dual role. She, of course, worked with Harry, but she also was part of the Trilby routine presented by Professor Dooley. Trilby was a very popular Gothic horror novel of the time, and it quickly became incorporated into shows and plays, and in this case, into a magic act. A historical note, Alexander and Adelaide Herman were doing their version of Trilby before Dooley, and it included a levitation. So Dooley was riding the coattails of not only the Trilby story, but also the Herman's illusion. In the show, Bess would be hypnotized and placed upon a wooden board suspended by two chairs. Suddenly, she would raise up into the air in the horizontal laying position. So Bess was also one of the early floating ladies. According to Bruce McNabb's book, Metamorphosis, The Apprenticeship of Harry Houdini, the Trilby illusion was very, very well received, but it was still Harry and Bess's metamorphosis mystery that stole the show. Unfortunately, they had little success in Canada with the Marco Magic Company and Professor Dooley. When it was all over, they left with the clothes on their backs and the same trunk that they started with, but they didn't have enough money for hotels or money to buy passage back to the States. Here's where Bess Houdini comes to the rescue, not once, but twice. With no money at all, and Houdini having harsh memories of previous seasickness, Bess took it upon herself to speak with the captain of the SS Yarmouth. It was bound for Boston, but they had no money. The captain listened to her heartfelt story and agreed to give them passage in exchange for having them entertain the passengers. When it came time for the show, the boat had already been enduring some very severe sea storms. Houdini was green and could barely stand. His always powerful voice was barely heard, and he nearly fainted. Then his nose started to bleed uncontrollably. He was in no condition to perform. Houdini headed out to the deck to throw up for the foreseeable future. The audience laughed hysterically, and Bess was beside herself. This was a condition of their trip. They had to perform, but what to do? Being the real trooper that she was, she decided to do the magic act herself. Now keep in mind, she had never done the act herself, though she knew how the tricks worked, and she fumbled her way through. Someone in the audience took his hat and took up a collection for the brave young woman. Bessie, and when she counted the money, had made $25, or a little bit more than that. It might as well have been $1 million, as they had nothing. But now they had something. She ran to find Houdini, who was leaning over a railing, sick as they come. She excitedly showed him the money. She asked if she could spend some to buy food, and he yelled at her, "No!" According to Bruce McNabb's book, this was the only time in their 33 years of marriage he ever raised his voice to her. He was consumed with seasickness and the humiliation of not being able to perform. She, however, was consumed with hunger. Thankfully, she was offered some food by a crew member, and she took full advantage of it. Clearly, in this instance, Bessie had saved the day. Through the start and into 1898, times were rough for the Houdinis, but their break was soon to come. In 1899, Houdini would meet Martin Beck, and it would change his life and Bess's life forever. The act would no longer be the Houdinis, however. It would only be him, even though Bess still assisted and was part of the metamorphosis routine. The act went from a standard magic act to a very specific act, an escape act. And as this was a relatively new thing, he was charting new ground. Bess always traveled with Houdini, whether she was in the act or not. Eventually, he would add other crew members to the show, so her responsibilities on stage dwindled. When the metamorphosis was taken out of the show, that was pretty much it for Bess's involvement in the stage act. There is a curious yet charming story that Burling Hull would tell of his first encounter with Harry and Bess Houdini. This is from the March 2007 Linking Ring. Quote, "Once a month, the Society of American Magicians in New York City would hold a meeting. But the meetings back then were nothing like magic clubs of today. They were more like our yearly banquets that many clubs hold. A short meeting was first held in private, and then the guests and partners were invited into the meeting room for dinner and dancing afterward. Burling was a young man, just old enough to be invited to the meetings and basking in his glory from his 2 magic books on billiard balls and escapes. After the meeting, a band started to play, and Houdini walked away from Bess, leaving her alone. He joined another group of magicians to talk business. Burling saw Bess sitting like a wallflower and walked over and asked her to dance. Burling then, and until his death, was a very attractive man. In his 80s, he had thick white hair and always dressed like he owned the city. As a late teenager, he drew attention walking the streets of New York in his all-white suit and his Panama hat. Bess accepted the dance offer, and the 2 of them danced across the floor. Either Houdini or someone in his group noticed what had just happened, but it was a very quick Houdini who stepped out onto the dance floor and cut in on Burling. He then escorted Bess back to her seat. There he left her and returned to his gentleman friends. The next month brought a repeat of the same Society of American Magicians meeting, but this time, when the band started to play, Houdini escorted Bess over to where Burling was standing. He apologized for not knowing who the young magician was the month before, and mentioned he admired his writings. He also apologized for taking Bess from the dance floor and wondered if he would mind dancing one number with her. Burling and Bess were a dapper couple that evening, dancing about the floor. Truly, the book The Secret Life of Houdini by William Kalush and Larry Sloman reveals the most scandalous information about Bess. Much of it comes from her own diary entries and other from a letter from Bernard Ernst to Conan Doyle. We learn Bess had been drinking heavily during the last year of Houdini's life, and even more so after he died. In truth, she had consumed alcohol for years, and it only got worse over time. Besides drinking, she also smoked both cigarettes and marijuana. Now picture this. For her entire married life, she had Houdini. Yet, she suffered from bouts of loneliness and even jealousy as he became ever more popular and in demand. She was relegated to the shadows. On top of this, her health was not the best, and her temperament was also something to be weary of. Houdini would mention her poor health in letters to friends, and they would often ask how Bess was feeling. During Houdini's last days on Earth, while he was in the hospital, he's reported as telling the doctor, quote, "Please keep that woman out of my room all the time because she is the most peculiar woman I have ever known in my life," unquote. I think at this point, Houdini just couldn't deal with her manic mood swings. It wasn't long after this that he was gone. And as for Bess, she would be alone for the first time in over 30 years. One of the more shocking revelations was that Bess had attempted suicide. And not once, but on multiple occasions. Her drinking, and after Harry died, was so bad that she wanted to go be with him. Her life was a mess. Add to this Reverend Arthur Ford, who basically wooed Bess Houdini. He took her to parties. He likely used her alcoholism to his favor. He was an alcoholic himself. It was claimed that Bess was in love with him. This is another thing I question. I think she just wasn't in her right mind at this point. And I help. And now her reputation was in question. Di Vernon knew Houdini, and he always made no bones about not being a fan. Not sure he could be considered a friend either, maybe an acquaintance. But he did seem to have a friendship with Bess. According to Genie magazine, November 1983, in the Knights of the Magic Castle column, it says, Di once told of visiting Bess the night after Houdini had died, and how she felt terrible and related to him that two well-known magicians had already been there to load up a suitcase with Houdini's belongings. From the book Di Vernon, A Magical Life by Bruce Servan, we have this story by Vernon, quote, "We were on our way up the boardwalk towards the Episcopal Church in Atlantic City when we saw our friend Bessie Houdini. She asked where we were going, and we told her that we were off to have our son christened. Bessie asked us if we had a godmother for our little boy. And we told her we were just down from New York City and hadn't had time to find godparents as of yet, when she immediately offered to be our son's godmother. We accepted her touching offer and headed off to the church. A short time later, we were standing in front of the minister as he was christening our son. The ritual proceeded with sprinkling water on our boy's head and giving the blessing, and then he asked us, the father's name, the mother's name, the godmother, and Bessie said, Bessie Houdini. The minister looked up from our son and said, what was that last name? Houdini, said Bessie, Houdini. The minister's eyes widened, and he said in an excited voice, You're not related to the Houdini, the wonderful man who, and Bessie beamed back, I'm his wife. This man of God nearly fell apart for a few minutes forgot why we were all there, but Ted finally received his christening, even though he played second fiddle to Bessie. From the Episcopal Church, our little christening party proceeded over to the Traymore Hotel for a little celebration, honoring this important day in my young son's life. We put Ted in a high chair and ordered him some sort of soup and a regular dinner for Bessie, Jean, and myself. Sometime later, as we sat finished and well fed, the waiter came and began cleaning the table. As he lifted Ted's plate, there was a $100 bill under the plate. "That's for the baby," Bessie said in a firm voice. He was just christened. It was a wonderful and thoughtful thing to do, and I still remember it today with much emotion. And speaking of giving things away that belonged to Houdini, I learned from a May 2003 interview with Sid Fleischman in Magic Magazine that Bessie gave Houdini's die box to a kid magician, Bob Gunther, who later gave it to the Magic Castle, and Jim Conley was given Houdini's own copy of Eliot's Last Legacy. There is a story that Frances Marshall relates in the pages of Abracadabra magazine, June 25th, 1977. She says that she went to visit Bess in her Laurel Canyon home in Los Angeles. And here's what the article says. She says the home was a Houdini shrine with countless posters and photos hung about, programs, etc., laid on the tables for guests to examine. Bess was a charming hostess, but a careless one. Several hundred people were at a magic convention in the nearby city. She invited a dozen to visit the home and partake in a buffet. She did not explain that it was a private invitation, and I'm only sorry to say she was overrun by the uninvited to the point where she was ready to leave the house herself. I had been there and left before the deluge, but the next day she was still trying to figure it all out. Another quote from that same article by Frances Marshall says, "In my conversations with Bess Houdini, she showed that she thought a great deal of the husband who had died, but she didn't act as though she had lost the hero of the second coming. Time does work wonders. If you stay dead long enough, you might get to be important." Here's another nice story, this time from 1936, and it appeared in the New Tops magazine. It's an article by Henry Valou called My Friend Bess. In 1936, I was working inside the Harry Gilman World of Mirth Illusion show on the Foley and Burke combined shows in California. Being from the East Coast, Mr. Gilman had known both Houdini and his wife very well. Before leaving our show, she invited me to visit her if I ever got to Los Angeles. And about a year later, I was in LA and gave her a telephone call and made an appointment to see her. And she was one of the most gracious and charming women I have ever met. She was living in a small, tastefully furnished apartment. She took me about and showed me many glass-covered cases lined in velvet, and each one was Houdini's original handcuffs, lockpicks, various keys, and other paraphernalia that he had used to perform his outstanding escapes. She then pointed to a beautiful walnut cabinet with 2 doors in front. She asked me if I would like to see the Houdini shrine. Of course, I replied in the affirmative. She opened the doors, and inside was a splendid oil portrait of Houdini. It was lighted. She went on to say that it was a perpetual light and that she never turned it off. We, of course, talked of Houdini for a long time. We know, thanks to the final Houdini seance in October 1936, that Bess finally extinguished that light for good. Later, she was quoted as saying, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man. Bess would eventually meet Edward Saint, who would become her partner, traveling companion, some say possibly her husband, but I don't think that was ever official. Together, they worked to further the Houdini name. Saint really helped to keep Bess on track. He brought order to her life. and also kept her out of trouble. When Saint passed away, Bess's health deteriorated fast. She spent some time at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital before returning to her apartment. Her sister Mary Hinson came to live with her. Bess wanted to fly to New York, but was refused airfare by the airline because of her heart condition. Instead, she would take the train to New York. Before leaving, she met with her dear friends William Larson Sr. and his wife Jerry. She told them that once her New York trip was over, she'd be back for a proposed party they were all going to have in July of that year. But Bill and Jerry knew this was going to be their last moments with Bess. While on the train with her sister, Bess Houdini passed away. She died May 11th, 1943, in Needles, California, a fitting end for a Houdini. According to her sister Marie, Bess returned to her Catholic faith in her last days. Though she has a plot and a gravestone in Macapella Cemetery, Bess is actually buried in the Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York. I found where Marie Blood, Bess's niece, was asked by Bess to carry on the tradition of keeping the Houdini name alive, which Marie did until her death in 2004. Today it seems that John Hinson, Bess's great-nephew, carries on that tradition. He owns a very few special Houdini artifacts, as well as numerous unpublished images of Bess and Harry, and some needlepoint embroidery done by Bess herself. And I think that's going to do it for our look into the life of Bess Houdini. There is a lot I didn't cover, as I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of her life. It's hard to separate Bess from Houdini himself, even after death, because she did all she could to promote him. Granted, when he was gone, she was the Houdini, and people treated her like royalty. Well, at least those who weren't out to exploit her for some nefarious reason. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Magic Detective Podcast. If you did, please consider giving me a like or a thumbs up or a nice review on Apple Podcasts. And until next time, I'm Dean Carnegie. I am the Magic Detective. Please be well and stay safe.